I'm Kelly O'Keefe.
And I'm Bridgette Deeney. Thank you for making out this morning.
We're doing our presentation on disability support services. Our outcomes for this presentation are for you to gain a better understanding of this functional area, to kind of put yourself in this role and have a little bit of hands-on experience throughout. So a brief background is in the mid-20th century, disability services was more housed in rehabilitation services, so that's how students were served. There wasn't necessarily an office or support for them, but after World War II, the disability rights movement started taking place, and that's when things started really happening. Veterans were coming back, and some of them were coming back with impairments and wanting to be served and wanting to get that higher education. In 1973, the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 happened, and that's when those services really started being formed. We had the 504 plans, which are individual plans to help accommodate disability services. In the 70s and 80s, that's when the offices started really formatting in undergraduate education and graduate education. In 1977, AHEAD, which is a professional organization, and Bridgette will tell you lots about that later, started, and it's been going ever since. In 1990, the Americans with Disabilities Act was really fully developed, and in 2008 it was amended, and that's where the specifics of these are the services you have to provide. You have to have them for these students. You cannot not allow students to come because of their disabilities, and you have to provide those services.
Okay, so the mission of disability services, according to the CAS standards, is the primary mission of disability resources and services is to ensure equal access for students with disabilities to all curricular and co-curricular opportunities offered by their institution. And I think that most of, or all of the groups that all the people we interviewed did fit with this mission. There's kind of a different way you go about it if you fall under academic affairs versus student affairs sometimes because of the focus. Yeah, so if you're trying to help the whole student, a lot of people say student affairs is a good way to go, but sometimes we learned that at Northwestern they fall under academic affairs, and they feel like then the professors listen to them, but they don't necessarily always get to have as equal access to things like residence life to serve the student. Let me talk about AHEAD. So we asked all of our people we interviewed, well, what professional organizations can we join? And we're trying to find out more information. And we got AHEAD every time, and people were very excited about AHEAD, and they thought it was really a really good resource. And there weren't many other professional organizations that were noteworthy, and none that anybody else wanted to talk about other than AHEAD. So I'm going to speak a little bit about AHEAD. And this is the national group, the Association for Higher Education and Disability. It's a national level group, but there is chapters for your state. So in Minnesota, there's MinAHEAD, and one of the men that I interviewed with was so excited about it, he printed me the member application form. And so if you really want information, I can copy this and give it to you at a later date, but it costs $40 to be a member of MinAHEAD. So that doesn't include conferences and things like that, but it's pretty inexpensive. They want to be accessible for all people, and I think that continues with their membership for the professional organization financially. It's something good to look into. You can also get on listservs. There are also meetings monthly that happen in the Twin Cities area usually, because that's where most of the schools come from. St. Thomas is a part of that, and I would suggest that if anybody has intense interest in this, to contact the University of St. Thomas's Disability Resource Center and ask if they could sit in on a meeting. It isn't for the public, but they are very willing to have people sit in.
Okay, some of the challenges that I encountered, or that my interviewees encounter, it takes a long time to see change. It takes a really long time. Mari from the University of Minnesota, she came from a K-12 interpreter background, and if she wanted something done there, she just had to make a few calls, and it kind of happened. But in higher education, it's a lot slower of a process, and she really took note of that when she started in her field. Now, Scott, who is also at the University of Minnesota, they're both associate directors in that office. It's a very large office. They have 4 different compartments of their department and over 50 employees, so it's on a much bigger scale. And he said, we're viewed as a service and we take others off the hook. And that was before they just recently had a name change in their office to Disability Resources Center. So that way they're not seen so much as a service. You have this student and you just send them to us. But they're really working on empowering other colleges, professors, and faculty to take ownership that they're educating a diverse population and that they should have certain accommodations prepared in advance instead of showing this awesome YouTube video that a hearing impaired student wasn't able to experience because there weren't captioning. The shared by all challenge is collaboration. We talk about it a lot in student affairs. Collaborating with professional staff can be difficult but also wonderful once that's overcome and you have that collaboration with others. The rewards, Scott made a really awesome point. He said, we can plant a seed in faculty across the campus. If we nourish it, we can make this life-changing experience available for some people who normally wouldn't be able to. And he really talked about how college is life-changing and this experience is one of a kind. And making sure it's equally accessible for all is so important and so crucial. And if we could plant that seed in faculty to see students as diversity instead of disability, then we could really plant that seed in them and help them understand that this experience should be experienced by all. And so adapting the education and their teaching to these students will help them. And then another reward is finding that solution to collaboration. Okay, the services they offer. Would you like to cover that?
Sure. So there's a plenitude of services offered by Disability Resources, and if they don't offer them directly, then it is their job to know how you can access them. You never know who is going to step into your office for Disability Resources and what kind of needs that they're going to have, which a lot of professionals find as an incredibly rewarding part of their job, like piecing together a puzzle of how best to serve students. But here are some more common ways that you might work with somebody who came into your office, advising them on classes to take that and how they could take those classes. One of the people at St. Kate's talked about how her least favorite part of her job was having to tell students, you know, you will have to do these things to be professional in your field. Like, are you interested in any other fields? And that does happen. And a lot of people see Disability Resources as, you know, you have to help that person succeed in what they want, but sometimes it's just not a match. Like if you can't pass the class where you need to do CPR on the mannequin because you're getting too out of breath every time and you're failing that class again and again, you're not going to be able to do that in real life in your job professional setting. So that's kind of a hard part, but they can also advise you on ways to get to your goals that might be a little bit outside of the box. There's lots of planning on how you can get places. Note taking is really common. One of the most common is having somebody be a note taker in one of your classes. That's pretty easy. Sometimes the person who's taking the notes doesn't even know who they're going to end up going to. Adapting a text at the University of St. Kate's, they showed me that this program where you can take any text if you have enough time ahead of time, and you can translate it so it'll read to you. And there's different voices. They all sound very computery, but there's different voices, and you can get them to go different speeds and read to you, so that you can, if you have a processing disorder, you can read the text and hear the text. And they're making this more and more accessible at St. Kate's to students whose English isn't their second language, and has also showed struggle in their first set of nursing classes. Because in nursing, if you don't do well, you're out of the running pretty early on. So they're saying, how can we help students who might not be disabled but might also benefit from these services and be more successful that way? Interpreters at Northwestern, they talked about how interpreters were the most expensive form of assistance they can give a student, because in Northwestern it costs $40 an hour to hire an outside person to come interpret for the classes. And then not only in addition to all the classes have to be interpreted, but also all the mandatory religious functions, and how that really adds up. And individual plans are the most important thing. At St. Kate's, Patty Walloway talked about how it still haunts her that this young woman had to drop her classes because she couldn't find her way to class, and how they kept trying to think, like, how could we have walked her there more times, and different plans that would help a student, and not all plans succeed.
And adapting text really surprised me because the Disability Service Office had to know what textbooks they were going to have months in advance. So if you're getting that text translated into Braille, you need months and months in advance, and then you need those tests that these teachers are going to do at least a week in advance. And so I know some of the teachers I've had kind of prepared on the fly, but having teachers who prepare those in advance, send them to disability resources, and then put them into Braille and give them back to the teacher.
When you say interpreters, is that like sign language specifically? Are there more kinds of interpreters that you would find on the campus?
Oh, go ahead.
Well, when we put it in here, we're mainly talking about sign language interpreting, just because it's often seen as something through disability resources, where somebody who needs an interpreter for their class for other language difficulties generally would ask another group like International Student Services, or would already have something worked out as part of their admissions process. And also a lot of people who don't see themselves as being traditionally disabled tend to really avoid disability services, even if they could benefit from it, which is actually a real bummer for providing services.
The skills it takes to be in this profession, I ask my interviewees every time, okay, so what are you looking for in an interviewee? What does it take to be you? And they said passion and compassion are crucial, having resilience, because this can get hard when faculty are not fully understanding what's going on. I talked to one of my interviewees, and she had an email in her inbox asking, okay, well, are you giving these note-taking tutorials to the student who needs a note-taker instead of supplying this person? And she was lovely and patient in responding, and it had been 2 days since she received this email. And I was getting riled up. I was like, what? Because it's a cognitive thing. It's not something that you could train and then put into practice. Like, they cognitively are not able to take that information in, put it on paper, and keep retaining what you're saying. And so having a pal in the class to take those notes for them, so that way they could focus on what the teacher is saying and get all that information they can, and then have those notes to look back on. So it's an opportunity to educate, and having persistence and keep pursuing to educate others and motivate them to take ownership in their classrooms. Having legal knowledge, knowing the resources you have to provide, and we both realize that when disability services professionals are talking to educators, you have to be very cautious of mentioning, like, we know that you're kind of not understanding this, and we're trying to educate you and give you this motivation without bringing in, like, this is your legal obligation. We're encouraging you, but you actually have to do this, and avoiding that part, because that kind of brings up a little
That should be your last resort type thing, because when you say something like, nope, what you're doing is against the law, it's kind of like, I'm not against the law, like, I don't like, and then it just deteriorates from there. You have to be really, keep the law in your mind. That's your goal. You're going to get there, but it might take a bunch of emails and going over there to actually get them to comply with the law.
And then something, I was asking them, okay, well, we're coming from student affairs backgrounds. What would you recommend? Because a lot of them have interpreting backgrounds, backgrounds in counseling, and they said, any experience with disabilities. So if you were involved in high school or just volunteering, anything that shows that you have a passion for disability services and a little bit of experience in that area would be great if you're interested in this area.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about universal design, and the quote on here is just something to help me remember what I want to talk about. So, but basically it's that we're all sharing the same space. We all have similar goals for how we want to get through the day and what kind of things we want to do. There are ways of making our world more accessible for people with disabilities that also makes it more accessible for all people. And that there are some changes that would be very easy to make. Can anybody think of a way that our school may have been adapted to help somebody with disabilities but also makes your life easier? There's a really key one, yeah. The elevator. So that's just a key way of seeing it. Also, when you're walking across the street, and there's the and it's properly set up so that when you walk across the street, it goes down. There's the bumps raised so that somebody who can't see can feel, so that you can, if you're on your skateboard, can go off easier. There's a lot of things that are. It's just a better world for all people, and there's really no reason why we can't strive to meet that. And it's a professional goal of some people. There's a big research grant. One of our people had gotten Lisa King for this.
Okay, and we'll zoom through the rest. I know we're missing our time. Critical issues, there's a lot of technology versus disabilities. Arizona State used a Kindle and it wasn't accessible to blind students, so they went through a lawsuit about that. There's a social versus medical model. Social is that disability is diversity, and medical is you have a problem, we need to fix you. Clearly we were a little chatty, but on your tables you have an envelope, and when you open it, you have a student, an opportunity, not a challenge, and a question to ask, what would you do?
And the group that doesn't, we will be telling you what you're going to be working on, and then you're also going to share. So
take like 2 minutes.
Yeah, we've got 3 minutes total.
yeah, okay. So 1 minute of reading, and then
Yeah, I'll just read it.
okay.
The student is Alice, and she is deaf. The opportunity is that the school year is about to start, and Alice's teacher loves to use YouTube videos in his lessons. How can you approach the teacher to make sure there's equal access to this style of instruction? What are the challenges you may face? How will you overcome them?
So like some videos could have closed captions, but if they don't, then they're not going to be, unless it's like a visual diagram video, if there's too much speaking, they're not going to get a whole lot out of it. I don't know.
Just in personal experience in this, we have a teacher who uses a lot of videos, and then
Okay, you have
speaking
10
with
seconds.
the director, just trying to get maybe the teacher to use a video that does have closed captioning or something that's similar to her original video. Trying to see what.
Is she willing to? Is she easy to work with, or is she?
Yeah, she was willing
great.
to do that.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
I mean, sometimes it's a little tough. Some faculty are pretty strict on what they would like to use, but I mean, there are some that are just like.
Okay, should we wrapping up your conversation? I know it's quick.
Okay, who would like to share their situation there?
So we had a learning disability where our student is not able to take notes in class and focus cognitively. So our professor emails us saying, why can't Willie take note-taking tutorials in your office or with you? So we just kind of talked about this issue, this ongoing issue between the division between student affairs and academic affairs, and maybe kind of like, we didn't really get to exactly the solution, but we were kind of on the route to maybe like, how do we bring that up with the professor, like
Starting that thought
yeah,
process.
starting that conversation and like constructing an email or communication form backwards back to them, like, well, it's a little more complicated than that. And
Yeah.
so, yeah.
Very good. Anybody else want to share? We have time for one more, and then we're going to keep going. But I'm sure you came with some awesome conclusions.
And it just kind of puts your mindset in the frame of this is what disability services offers. I know one group has a student who's physically disabled and wants to go on a study abroad trip. Like those are real world situations that we have to accommodate.
And then Justy.
I'll do ours. So our student was named Matt, and he's blind, and he wants to take online courses. So the two things that we came up with is obviously there needs to be the audio piece, but ensuring that like when you're making it, because I've done online courses where they have the audio piece, they use things about not saying things like, in this graph you can see, like, you know, because a lot of times they use pictures along with the audio, so making sure that you have like two separate ones, and then making sure that the keyboards are there with the arrow on it.
That's good. So you're on on the right track. If you enjoyed that, maybe look into it more. If not, try it again. Okay, so before we are going to kind of talk a little bit about marginalization, and we're going to take questions. So
You have 5 seconds left, so.
So if you have any questions about marginalization, please.
That's good.
Thank you for your time.